Hi, my name is Dana Corsi, and I'm a member of the events team here at Worldwide Clinical Trials. Today, I'm excited to present you with our latest on-demand webinar titled Challenges of Drug Development in L-DOPA-naive Subjects with Diagnosis of Early Parkinson's Disease. This lecture is presented by our very own Tomislav Babic, Vice President of Neuroscience. Originally, Tom was meant to present this lecture at the Advances in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's Therapies Focus meeting in Vienna. However, due to the spread of coronavirus, the event was transitioned to a virtual one. I hope that you and your loved ones are kept safe during this stressful pandemic and that you may find this webinar helpful. Please enjoy.
I'm pleased to be with you here, and I'm going to share with you our challenges of drug development in levodopa-naive subjects with patients with early diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. Here you can see briefly an overview of the Parkinson's disease, which is a very complex disorder, including non-motor and motor symptoms. And this is not only CNS disorder, this is also general disorder with a lot of interesting and various symptoms and signs. What we are most interested in today, early stage of Parkinson's disease, and in particular how we can do clinical trials in early Parkinson's disease stage, because we know we have a very potent drugs which can be used from the beginning of the diagnosis. So this is what I'm going to share with you. But at the beginning, I would like to remind you on diagnostic criteria important for clinical research in Parkinson's disease. Many of investigators and physicians are using their own impression of criteria for diagnosis of early Parkinson's. But in clinical research, we are basically using two different diagnostic criteria, which are very similar. The old was UK Brain Burn criteria, and the new one is a Movement Disorder Society clinical criteria for established and probable Parkinson's disease. Regardless of which criteria we will be using for early Parkinson's disease patients, it's important to follow all of these supportive and absolute exclusion facts, which are important for a diagnosis of Parkinsonism and idiopathic Parkinson's disease. The main challenge after diagnosis is, shall we start treatment or shall we think about potential participation in clinical trials, particularly with disease-modifying drugs? And this is what I'm calling the honeymoon versus golden year paradigm. And I will show you now in this slide what is the, in fact, collision between honeymoon and Hauser's golden year principle. In line A, you can see the natural course of Parkinson's disease, and after onset of symptoms and diagnosis made, we can basically start symptomatic treatment. And of course, in many of our patients, we will have response in their motor symptoms and signs that many of investigators and physicians are calling honeymoon period, which is initial benefit of the levodopa dopaminergic agonist, but after a certain amount of time, we will have some wearing off phenomenon complications, and this honeymoon period will stop. On the other side, at the curve B, we can analyze what is the potential benefit of having clinical trials in early Parkinson's disease patients. So after diagnosis, we can consider randomized controlled clinical trials. And this is the period between diagnosis and start of symptomatic treatment, which will be delayed symptomatic treatment. And this is what Robert Hauser calls golden year, which is a potential opportunity to participate in disease modification clinical trials. So we analyzed among investigators and Parkinson's disease specialists how they are understanding the golden year, how happy they are with delayed Parkinson's disease treatment, and what we can expect from them in clinical trials in early Parkinson's disease patients. To help idea of delayed treatment in Parkinson's disease, I would like to remind you on two studies, which are PRAMIPEXOLE in early Parkinson's disease, PROUD study, which was delayed start, and also another study which was levodopa related. In PRAMIPEXOLE study, you can see here just briefly participants in a clinical trial. And what is important in this study, UPDRS score measured at the end of the clinical trial was practically equal for patients who started early with PRAMIPEXOLE and those who started delayed pramipexole treatment. So this means that after 9 months, practically, we didn't lose so much time in patient symptom severity, because after 15 months, practically, we had the same level of the UPDRS in both groups. Similar data we can see in recently published clinical trial with levodopa done in Netherlands and published last year in New England Journal of Medicine, where practically levodopa was given to one group from the beginning and another group as a delayed start. And after 80 weeks, practically all of the patients had non-significantly different average of the UPDRS total score. So these two studies are a good platform for the consider of the delayed start of the symptomatic treatment for clinical trial purposes, or in other words, these two studies are supporting Hauser's idea of the golden year. Now, I'm going to show you our own research among our investigators who are Parkinson's disease specialists. We ask them, how often do you delay starting levodopa dopaminergic agonist in de novo diagnosed Parkinson's disease? And you can see percentage of answers in 252 neurologists worldwide. So you can see that we ask them how they can do delay in patients who are older than 60 and the younger than 60. And it's important to see here that practically more than 2/3 of neurologists are not happy with delayed start of symptomatic treatment in patients younger than 60, whereas this percentage in patients older than 60 is about 35%. This is important for further design of the de novo clinical trials in Parkinson's disease. Another question is, how long do you delay starting of levodopa or dopaminergic agonists in de novo patients? And you can see the percentage of answers up to 3 months, between 3 and 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 to 12 months, and more than 12 months, also among patients below and above 60 years old. And you can see that practically we can conclude that 3 to 6 months is something which is more or less acceptable by many of neurologists. Another question was, what was initial treatment of your de novo Parkinson's disease patients in case of delayed levodopa and dopaminergic agonists? So you can see that 71% would start with MAO-B inhibitors. Amantadine will be used in about 17%, and also anticholinergic others and none will be in about 12% of patients. So this is the question. If we are designing clinical trial in early Parkinson's disease, shall we allow or not allow MAO inhibitors? Some studies allowed MAO-B inhibitors, some did not. So this is the question we can discuss when we are creating clinical trial in early Parkinson's disease. Definitely, if we do not allow MAO-B or amantadine treatment, the recruitment rate will be much lower than we expect. Finally, the question was, what is the most frequent reason for initialization of levodopa dopaminergic agonists after delay period in de novo patients in your practice? So we had answers of 199 neurologists. So basically, majority of them respond that patient's request is a major reason for initialization of symptomatic treatment, whereas UPDRS-3 or UPDRS-2 would be used only in 15% of a patients for a decision to initialize symptomatic treatment. Now, we are going to review experience of our neurologists in Parkinson's disease clinical trials. And you can see percentage of neurologists with the experience in clinical trials of phase 2 or 3 in Parkinson's disease. And you can see that only 74% of 152 neurologists have experience in clinical trials with de novo Parkinson's disease, whereas 46% had experience in one study and 28% of neurologists have experience in more than 2 Parkinson's disease studies in de novo Parkinson's disease patients. And finally, the question was a percentage of neurologists who will introduce symptomatic treatment if needed in clinical trial. You can see that this percentage is about up to 6 months is about 75%, whereas only 8% of neurologists will not delay symptomatic treatment at all for clinical trial purposes. The expected average delay of symptomatic treatment calculated from all of these answers from investigators is about 5.4 months, which is basically something less than we expected and what we've seen in studies with PRAMIPEXOLE or levodopa published last year. The next question was, what is the most common challenging factor in randomized controlled clinical trials in de novo Parkinson's disease patients? And you can see we used analog scale from 0 with no challenge to 5, the biggest challenge. And the most important challenge for recruitment of Parkinson's disease patients in the novo diagnosed group is patients' willingness to participate in the study and delay of symptomatic treatment. Therefore, these two reasons are probably the most important for the greater involvement of principal investigator, to talk to patients, to show them all benefits of early treatment or golden year approach. And therefore, we feel that investigators' involvement in the recruitment of de novo Parkinson's disease patients is probably the most crucial factor for study success. Now, I'm going to conclude with the most important recruitment factors for de novo Parkinson's disease patients, which we are using in our clinical settings in a CRO. We will definitely review as the most important part of the site selection infrastructure of the potential sites, which means their history of participation in clinical trials with de novo patients. So we need to see that they have a very good research team, they have a recruitment plan, that their recruitment activities record in previous clinical trials, what is the network of referrals, what is the pre-screening record, of course, and what are their supportive materials like Foxtrot Funder, recruitment toolkit, and so on. The next important factor is protocol complexity. Many protocols are more complex than should be, and the protocols should be simplified. Particularly, it's important to properly calculate sample size. And many of protocols at the moment have a problem in sample size calculation because they are using data from UPDRS3 or UPDRS2, and for primary endpoint are using MDS UPDRS2 and 3, which are different, and therefore they need to recalculate sample size on the basis of the primary endpoint used. Investigators' approach to honeymoon versus golden year is probably the most important in selection of investigators within a well-structured team, experience, of course, and investigators' motivation. Therefore, we guess that proper selection of investigators is practically halfway through successful trial. And of course, investigators' collaboration and network patients is most important, since we are expecting that investigator will explain patients a different approach with golden year and honeymoon, what is good for patients, what is not. Because we cannot rely only on patients' altruism to participate in clinical trials, because patients is definitely looking for his personal health benefit. But at the end of the day, from the patient's perspective, patient's trust is probably the most important part for the participation in early Parkinson's disease studies. To make conclusion, finally, we feel that patient willingness to participate in clinical trial and delay of symptomatic treatment are the most important challenges for the successful recruitment in randomized controlled clinical trials among de novo diagnosed Parkinson's disease subjects. And we can also conclude that delay of symptomatic treatment in de novo Parkinson's disease patients up to 6 months, or some of them even longer, will definitely justify a golden year approach for clinical trial purposes, and it seems acceptable by 2/3 of investigators. We guess that initialization of symptomatic treatment in de novo Parkinson's disease should be driven by objective neurological data from UPDRS3 usually, not only by patients wish to be treated with a symptomatic treatment, because in many cases we can see that objective finding with UPDRS is probably most important to see the clinically meaningful difference, which is usually in early Parkinson's disease up to 5 points. So we can probably suggest that if there is no difference between baseline and the time of decision more than 5 points, there is no need to introduce symptomatic treatment in patients who are in clinical trial. That's all what I had to share with you today, and thank you very much for your patience and interest.
If you enjoyed this presentation, please let us know. And if you'd like to learn more about how we can support your CNS trial, please contact us at www.worldwide.com.